Go ahead, you're the senator.
He doesn't say that when we're over in the Capitol, so.
Now I have another nickname for him, but we can't say it here. So.
It's great to be here with you. It's great to be home. I know Dan and I both are glad to be breathing some sane air, and to be back from Travis County after 5 months is a grind. The legislative process is tough. It's all hours. You know, you definitely can't get your feelings hurt as we come in and we promote your voice and your preferences in a very diverse environment that's really a case study in human behavior. So coming in with you sending me to the Senate to work with 30 other senators, and Dan doing such a great job in the House of Representatives, we wanted to visit with you today about some of our accomplishments and also some things we have left as challenges to tackle on your behalf.
You know, going into my 3rd term, you know, Brandon was there 4 terms as a representative and then went over to the Senate. So and there was actually, you had the biggest class, right, of senators. I think you had eight new senators, biggest in 25 years, and a lot of those guys were house trained, as we like to say it. So they get the understanding of how things actually work. I always tell people, I said, you know, the House is if you ever watch the movie Animal House, it's like Delta House, and then, you know, whatever the fraternity next door where they're doing all the paddling and everything's done behind closed doors, that's kind of how the Senate works. It is, isn't it? I mean, it's true. Don't lie to me about that. What you have here, just wanted to put this up. These are just kind of by the numbers. There were about 6,276 bills that were filed. We passed 1,323 of those bills. So it's a lot. The interesting thing is that what I figured out in my 3rd term is that depending on the group or depending on the people that are supportive or not supportive of you, you'll get good marks or bad marks, and we get scorecards and grades and all the other things. But the reality is that the governor had some priorities. The House had priorities, and certainly I know Brandon and the Senate, they had priorities. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we always agree. But at the end of the day, I think what we're going to share with you, we had a very conservative session. In fact, you know, we as a caucus do mail pieces, and the governor came out and said this was one of the most conservative legislative sessions that he's ever been a part of. Well, it was his first one. So I'm hoping that we can expand upon that as we go forward. But it really was. There was a lot of good things that we accomplished. So, Randy, you want to talk about the budget?
I can lead in on it, but you know, the budget is the only bill that we have to pass. So out of thousands of bills that are filed, we come into the legislative session for 5 months every 2 years. And the state budget for the 12th or 13th largest gross domestic product in the world that Texas offers, countries included, it's a big task. So we have an expenditure of around over $210 billion. We kept the budget below growth and inflation. I think right around or just below a 2% increase over the last 2-year budget, which for the way Texas is exploding in growth and all of the challenges that we have to fund state government, that's a very good mark to hit as a benchmark to set. I think we're 47th in the nation, our state is, in per capita taxation, and we're 49th in the nation in spending per capita. So we run things lean, but some of the details I'll let Dan hit as he breaks down where this money goes.
So if you look at it from a perspective, in education, health and human services are the majority of our budget. Health and human services include Medicaid, education is public ed, and higher education. Significant amounts of money that are spent there. That leaves, somewhere in the vicinity of, let's just say, 75% of the budget to do everything else that we have to do, okay? Including border security, transportation, water, running all our agencies. Significant amount of money is spent on those things. If you look at, by the numbers, we put in about $1.5 billion into public education. Now, the Senate Senate came in at 1.2. We were at $2 billion, but we also had another piece of legislation that Chairman Aycock authored House Bill 1759, which actually dealt with trying to deal with the lawsuit. We still have a lawsuit. Nancy and Robert are still suing us, and so we're going to have to resolve that issue. I mean, it's a significant problem. It's going to the Supreme Court. Don't know what the results are going to be. My expectation is that you know, the governor has said we're not coming back at all, so my guess is we'll deal with that in 2017. But since we didn't deal with it, we have an equity problem, and just to relate it to you in this perspective, you know, Humble ISD is at the max cap relative to their taxable rate. Not saying that they want to tax you more, but they don't have the ability to go to the voters and say, hey, we have costs, we have things that we have to pay for, and we can't pay for them. But there's about almost 300 school districts that are in that position out of the 1,200 school districts that are out there right now. Actually, the 1,029, because the other 200 and some are charter schools. So that's a problem. If you look at transportation, we allocated another $1 billion for transportation. So one way we did that was we entered diversions of the gas tax that's out there. That was a significant thing. Border security, that was probably one of the #1 things that's out there, and Brandon can talk a little bit about that as we get there. But we put about $800 million into border security. Funding for Child Protective Services, put about $330 million in there, and some behavioral health issues, about $240 million. So those are some of the kind of the highlights that are out there. But tax relief was important. Brandon, why don't you talk about tax relief, what you guys did in the Senate, and then what we did in the House, and then where we landed.
Well, I'll start with where we landed. So, you know, it's an amazing thing in Texas as we continue to compare ourselves with the rest of the country. We're the economic engine of North America, much because of what you're doing, not because of what we're doing in state government, but we're able to be your voice and to hopefully continue to set the parameters where our Texas families and businesses can continue to succeed. And one way of doing that is that we returned through this state budget $4 billion in tax relief. And that is not what normally you find at the state legislature level. It's certainly not what we find at the congressional level, where when you have billions and billions of dollars that government can spend, most of the time government does what? They spend it. And then we can all grade papers and decide, you know, was that a good bang for the buck, or, you know, was that a prudent way to use your money? So in returning $4 billion to the taxpayers, we set out to do so in 2 different ways. We raised your homestead exemption from $15,000 to $25,000 so that hopefully you can offset any rising appraisal values that definitely have us all in counties like this, definitely have us all you know, wondering every year, what's the appraisal district going to do with our individual property? And so that was about $1.2 billion in tax relief right there. The rest of the $4 billion was a 25% cut in the franchise tax. And so many of us set out to just repeal the franchise tax across the board. And again, you know, when you have lofty goals in mind, when you come into session, that's a good thing, because at the end of the day, we ended up at cutting that tax by a full quarter. And that's not what we normally see from government as well. So with that $4 billion coming back in different ways, the House and the Senate had different ideas, but we ended up, you know, coming together and negotiating these solutions and outcomes. That's how the session works. So you want to?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. You know, it's not. I think that any one body won over the other body on tax cuts, because I think it's important. Well, I still think we won. I think that no, you won. I think that it was a very robust debate, and that's a good thing. You know, it's good to be able to sit up there and talk about, geez, how much money are we going to give back to the taxpayers? And for my community, and really for Brandon and our, you know, this area that we share, including where he's up in Conroe and Beaumont, you know, we don't have significant large businesses. You know, we have small businesses. When you look at small businesses, a $1 million to $10 million business that's out there, what we did really makes a huge impact for those businesses. It can be significant as we go forward. So we're pretty proud about that. You have the naysayers that say it wasn't enough, we didn't do it in time, and you know, outside groups that are out there. But at the end of the day, you know, we should be judged on the results, not how we get there. You know, it's difficult to, you know, we're criticized when you're halfway through cooking your meal, right? And you say, geez, that doesn't look very good. But then we come back and we provided that, so that's important. Transportation. two different bills that were out there, SJR 5, which is a constitutional amendment that you're going to be able to vote on, in the motor tax vehicle credits, so that we're going to be able to take the sales tax for non-toll road funding areas for expansion purposes. Now for us, that's important because if you think about it, other than, we can get to 59, but for those of us that live, Westlake, Houston area, for us to be able to get downtown, we're taking tollways, right? I added it up, toll rate, for me to get to Austin, and I don't know if Brandon does this, but for me to go to Austin, Beltway 8 all the way to 290 and, getting into Austin on a weekly basis when I was going, was $20 one way. Okay, so I spent $40 going back and forth. I think that's just ridiculous, and it's because what's happened is that TxDOT hasn't been reviewed really. So the other thing we did is we put House Bill 20 in place, which actually provides oversight for TxDOT. And I don't know about Brandon, but I can tell you that last session during the interim, I sat on a select committee for oversight of TxDOT, and I came to the determination that their position is that they're going to outweigh the politicians. That meaning they're going to look at it and say they're not going to provide information, or they're going to be very not disclosure oriented. And it's a huge agency, huge agency. The single largest employer of engineers in the state of Texas is the Texas Department of Transportation. You would think that a state that is as advanced as we would be more privatized than we are, but we're not. So that's one of the things that we're going to do on transportation as we continue to go forward. But we have a significant problem with our roads and our bridges. Significant problem in dealing with that. And so we did allocate some dollars in a Constitution amendment last November that I think Brandon was about $1.5 billion that would come. It's split based on a cap on the rainy day fund that would go into that. But then we're going to talk about do you guys want your tax dollars on your vehicle purchases to be able to go there? And there were some other interesting things that happened in transportation, and I know Chester and India are back there very thankful that we didn't have a heavy load. There was some people trying to pass legislation that would increase the size of, or the weight of loads on trucks, which would be a really big problem relative to the weight that we put on our roads, and so we were able to stop some of that from happening. So some of the things we're talking about are good, but there's a lot of stuff that happened that was bad too. That we stopped from happening. And so you don't see that sometimes behind the scenes, but that's what we do. Brandon, why don't you talk about border security?
And just to add, on the transportation end, we're really under a lot of pressure just because simply our partner over time has been the federal government on a lot of our big transportation projects. And the Federal Highway Trust Fund Act is broke, and it has been for years. It's expected to be $12 to $15 billion upside down over the next 5 to 10 years. And so JFK's last speech, before he made his last speech in Dallas, was dedicating a toll road in Delaware. And his comments were that the federal government and the states have to partner together on infrastructure for roads and water to make the best future possible for our citizens. And now we don't have that partner because the money's not there. And so we have to come up with very, unique solutions on the transportation side to make things make sense. And so that's why we see some toll roads suggested in the highest density areas of the state as we continue to look for funding solutions. And I think this session we made some big strides there. On border security, when we were talking about some of these issues and coming before you in 2014, we had seen one of the largest increases of unaccompanied minors coming across our southern border. I think in 2013, that pace for unaccompanied minors coming across from Guatemala, the Honduras, and other origins was usually on a 12 to 15,000 a year pace. In 2014, the cartels got really smart, and they encouraged, through promising incentives and jobs and other things, amnesty in the states, those families increased that number, and it was up to 125,000 person pace in 1 year, from 12 to 15,000 the prior year. And that was really smart. The cartels are really innovative, because what did that do? That kept our law enforcement busy. And it flooded our capacities, our buildings, and just the physical process of handling all of that. And we put a DPS surge operation down on the border, which we've done in the past, and it immediately turned that around. The cartels, from what we know, are very nervous about our black and whites, about our DPS vehicles, armored vehicles, patrol cars. When they see those DPS colors coming in, they back off. But normally we have put the Department of Public Safety and our rangers down there temporarily, so they just wait. Now we have an indefinite presence on the border through $800 million in funding, building a command center, and doing some things that is unprecedented across the nation for a state to be doing. And it's unfortunate because that is something the federal level is responsible for, but we also take an oath when we are sworn into office to protect our citizens and respect the Constitution, and so we're having to engage in those areas, and we're going to see some positive results from it. So that's a big funding component, almost $1 billion. We're going to provide the oversight and the checks and balances to make sure that those safeguards are there and that we're seeing progress. If we're not seeing progress, we can suspend it, but we have to do something.
And, you know, in addition to that, one of the big things that happened is the National Guard was down there, and obviously those men and women have jobs, right? You know, they're weekend type of activities or every month, but we had volunteers that go down there and they ended up with about 1,000, and so those are getting pulled back. I'm in the Texas Guard, and we actually had at the height about 200 of our guardsmen down there. Doing background, helping support DPS, border security agents and things of that nature. So, you know, the issue is the appropriate personnel that need to be down there is DPS. They have the ability to arrest, carry weapons, things of that nature. And so it's made a huge difference. But, you know, when you read about this stuff last year, and it's like, you know, all these children coming in, which was true. But I can assure you, one of our drills that we went down, we were with Border Security and we were with Texas Air National Guard going down, and the people that are coming across at 11 o'clock, between 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning, are not children. These are bad guys. These are really, really, really bad guys, and they're bringing in dope, all kinds of crazy stuff. And so it is, you know, a huge problem. And, you know, I still blame the federal government. Because they're not providing the resources to be able to protect it, and it's making a huge impact in the state of Texas. Because once these kids get here, you know, they're being educated because the federal law requires it. They're using our hospitals, and they're not paying for any of these things. A couple other little quick things. Senate Bill 374 requires E-Verify. That's the first step in E-Verification for the public sector, universities and state agencies and municipalities. We think that's important. And then we also established a border security unit under House Bill 12. And what that did was it made sure that prosecutors are being able to coordinate their activities. So if we are busting these guys, you know, at 10, 11 o'clock at night, we're just not catching and releasing, which is what has been happening. And once you catch these criminals that are coming across, and I consider them criminals because they're breaking the laws of the United States and certainly of our borders, we have the ability to actually deal with them in a more expeditious manner. But all of these things cost money, and it's costing you, the taxpayers, are doing it. So it is a significant problem, but we heard loud and clear this was money that people wanted to spend, and so we did.
And the media will portray this as a partisan issue. It's definitely not a partisan issue. When you go down into the border counties, it's almost a 90% polling result among families that identify with both, you know, Republicans and Democrats, that they feel that their communities are not safe. That directly affects the Texas economy. It directly affects lives. The human trafficking element related to the cartel activity. It's not a huge revenue generator for them, and this is a business for them. They look at it this way, but it's cash flow. And what they're doing to you know, minors and female minors in the way that this human trafficking aspect of the cartel business operation is something that I know that Dan and I both and many others are set on making a difference in turning that around. So we hear a lot of good feedback from you, and we'll continue to give you updates as we see more and more of the progress of what we're doing on the border.
Want to talk about guns?
Sure. So this session, you know, Texas is Texas, right? So we are always a strong Second Amendment state. We have seen in the past, this is my 5th legislative session. I worked 25 years ago as a legislative aide in the Senate when I was working my way through college, and at that time it was strong Second Amendment with concealed carry legislation and other bills coming to the table. This session, it was open carry and campus carry, which campus carry passed the House last session, but it died in the Senate. Now we become the 46th state in the nation to have a version of open carry. So many of us didn't realize that, and when we talk about open carry and everybody, going to Dairy Queen with a gun on their hip, not necessarily the case, right? I can ride my horse to Wells Fargo to make a deposit, but I don't. But having the freedom to be able to make sure that as the bad guys have guns, that we are also able to make sure that we can protect ourselves. And when someone walks into a bank or walks into this building and we're all concealed carry, they might take a risk. They might take a gamble. They might not necessarily know who among us has a firearm and who doesn't. But we're going to be the 46th state in the nation now to have open carry with a license. And what we've seen through data is that our concealed carry license holders are the least in our communities that have the propensity to commit a crime. I think it's under 4%. And so these are law-abiding citizens. If they're not law-abiding citizens, they're going to have a gun, they're going to do bad things. I've never seen a true gun-free zone proven to me. I've seen the signs, but I also see, a lot of the bad scenarios. With campus carry, we have a lighter version of campus carry that we passed because administrations can opt out, which is my understanding. Dan, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we actually did it in the House. There was some concerns, and actually the leader of this was Bill McRaven, who is now the chancellor at UT, and for those of you who don't know who he is, he was the commander of SEAL Team 6 that killed our buddy over there in Pakistan, bin Laden, and so he was the leader of that, and so he's obviously a remarkable man, and he came out against it, and so they offered some legislation. They give some flexibilities to the chancellors to be able to say you can't have a gun in particular places, med schools, things of that nature. So it did provide some flexibility, but for those people, when you think about it, on the college campuses, you go to school at night or whatever, you weren't even allowed to have a gun in your car. And so last session we dealt with being able to, if you have a gun in your parking lot at your employer, you're allowed to be able to do that. So those are significant things. Now Nancy Morrison asked me about, do we get to carry guns at school board meetings yet? And I said, no, Nancy, you don't get to shoot everybody yet. But yours your first meeting, so that was the first question she asked me. So I'll try and get that done for you next session, Nancy. Okay? Robert, you may want to move, but let's talk about public education for a little bit, and be happy to, we'll leave some time to answer any questions. But in House Bill 1, we talked about, funding enrollment growth and where we're at. So public education, and I sit on that committee, it's my 3rd session sitting on that committee. And I will tell you that those meetings go very, very, very late. If you look at the amount of bills that are filed, roughly about 30% of all bills that are filed, at least in the Texas House, have something to do with education in some form or fashion. We ended up with somewhere around, I think, 1,800 bills or something like actually no, because the House only filed, because if you look at the amount of bills filed, 6,200, I think it worked out to about 30%. I think we were almost about half of those bills or something like that. So it was 1,000 to 1,100 bills that were filed. Obviously we didn't pass that many, we didn't hear that many. You have to be very selective about a lot of repetitive kind of stuff that goes in, but it was important. The one bill that, and I filed, I obviously focus a lot on education. I'll run through these real quick, and then there's one I know Brandon wants to talk about board managers, but one of the bills I filed actually was House Bill 4, and the way the House works, and the way the Senate works as well, is that the Speaker and also the Lieutenant Governor reserve a certain amount of bill numbers, the low bill numbers, and so we got HB 4, which is the pre-K bill. And so this was the governor's #1 priority to be able to do that. Now, it took a lot of effort to get this done. Unfortunately, we had some outside groups that, when this was happening, came out with a letter not supporting it. I don't think they understood exactly what it did, but they called it a godless socialist program. Okay, so as we went forward, you know, the governor got involved and he got engaged. Donna Campbell carried it on the Senate side. She offered some additional amendments. There's a cap in there at $130 million. And ultimately, we concurred with the amendment, so we got this done. We got this passed, and the governor signed it. So what this does is improves high-quality programs for pre-K. In the case of Humble ISD, it'll mean somewhere in the vicinity of about $700,000 a year in additional funding. So this is money they're already spending. We're not expanding it. It's not universal pre-K. It's not full-day pre-K. It's none of those things. What it does do, though, is requires them to be able to put a high-quality program in place. In addition, it also allows private providers to be able to participate. So when you look at the Kids Are Kids of the world, Primrose, things of that nature, it's important because they then can coordinate with the school districts, just much like the YMCA does for after-school programs. They can actually provide the education on a day-to-day basis. What does that do for school districts? It provides additional flexibility, but also increases the campus size because now you're taking those pre-K kids off the campus, still overseen by the ISD. So we think it's a unique opportunity, and we're going to get the results back and see how we do. House Bill 18 eliminates the limit on dual credits. This is good for all you that have kids that are in high school right now. They're going to college because there was a limit on that. So it takes the limit off, and what that means is that you can actually get more college credits as you go forward. What we're finding in education clearly is that students learn much differently than all of us used to learn. The technology they have, the abilities they have, the advancement they have. I mean, hell, I can't even do my fifth grader's math program anymore, math problems anymore, right? You know, and my daughter's taking geometry. I'm like, yeah, I have no idea. I'll have to Google that and figure it out, right? And then she stopped asking because I got a bunch of them wrong. So, you know, I am not smarter than the fifth grader. There's no doubt about that. So, but that's good for these kids. Senate Bill 149. This was a very interesting bill. This was a very criticized bill, but I picked it up and I carried it. Senator Seliger picked this up. There were a bunch of kids that were caught in between when if you remember, for those of you who remember last session, we passed a bill called HB 5, House Bill 5, which actually lowered the amount of tests that are given in high school from 15 to 5, meaning the end of course tests that we had to give kids. Keep in mind, they're still taking tests by the teachers, they're still doing all these things, and Brandon, you might want to chime in on this if you want on 149, but what we found was that there was these middle-of-the-road kids, juniors and seniors graduating this year, that actually were subject to the 15 tests. So these kids took 15 tests, and there was a percentage of kids, and it worked out to be, I think it was 28,000 kids. In March, in February, it was about 55,000 kids, but they did a retake. But it was about 28,000 kids that were not going to be able to graduate. These are kids that completed all their coursework, passed all their tests, were on track to be able to graduate, but they couldn't pass one up to 3 or more of the tests. And so what we did is we gave them a bye, so to speak, and said, okay, you know, we didn't, because the TEA didn't roll out the program very well when they did the testing, which was back in 2011. And so we said, okay, we're going to allow you to not have to take 2 of those tests. And so if you looked at it from a perspective of where we landed, you know, if they failed, you know, 1 or 3 or more tests, they still had to pass that 1 test. So they still had more tests that they had to take. So what the end result was, is there was about 16,000 kids that were able to walk across the stage at the end of May by us passing this bill. Again, we paid for, you know, them to go all the way through high school and pass that test. One thing that we did do is we sunset it for this year and for next year. So that provision goes away because the new provision will be in place. But I know there was debate on the Senate floor about that as well. He doesn't want to talk about it. Okay.
And that's established by a committee, right?
Established by a committee. So the school district still has a committee to determine whether or not this person has actually tried to be able to do there. So we think that that's important. One of the other things that we looked at, House Bill 743, one of the bills I passed, limits the amount of time for testing. For those of you not really in the weeds on this, what we found is that there's a 4-hour limit on testing that is in place today. And a lot of these kids will get done in 2 hours, and then when these kids get down, they put their pencil down, and they have to sit in their seats, and they have to watch all these other kids take a test. And this really comes from results of what the experience my child has had, and then one of our other friends, that they're not really great testers. These kids aren't great testers, and so they're being stared at by these other kids. Now what happens at the 2-hour mark, they put their pencils down, they take a break, and these kids that have not finished are then pulled out of the classroom and put into the library by a proctor. We think that that makes a huge difference, but we limit the amount of tests, we limit the amount of scope of what they're being tested on. We think that's going to make a huge difference. Found out that we didn't have liability on our kids when they're on school buses, if they're on a charter bus, if they're going off campus. So, we got kids traveling up to Austin, they're in a charter bus. You don't have any insurance on that. I don't know if you guys didn't know that or not. And so now we have the ability to be able to do that. We also eliminated one of the star writing tests in 4th through 7th. We eliminated the writing test in 4th and 7th grade from a standardized test, meaning Pearson. And if you read articles within the last week or two, you will have found that Pearson misgraded somewhere around 200,000 tests. And they don't know if the results are good or not. And so they're actually going to probably throw away the results from the testing for 4th and 7th grade for writing this year. So think about the taxpayer dollars that we wasted there. We're actually putting it back in the school district's hands and let them test writing. We think that that's going to be good. You want to talk about your board of managers, Bill?
Yes, there's situations, and they're rare, but if a school district is failing or there has been, gross mismanagement or misconduct by the school board members, such as we've seen in the Beaumont ISD situation, the Texas Education Commissioner can replace those school board trustees with a board of managers, people made, from that community that would come into a leadership role and help the school district get back on track. Right now, there's a set amount of time that's allowed for those board of managers to be in place, and a lot of these problems take time. So I carried legislation with Representative Huberty to allow for that local school board, that is the replacement school board, to ask for additional time of up to 2 years to continue to implement those changes. And so Dan and I worked on that together. Dan was the author, I sponsored it in the Senate. And these situations, again, are limited, but they're very important when we're talking about our kids and the dollars that are going to these classrooms and how they're spent.
There's a couple other reforms. I won't burden you with time on this because there's a lot of stuff that's out there, but education reform was a big issue. Again, 35% of our budget, health and human services, 36% of our budget, but a lot of different things that are out there. Veteran affairs, a lot of different things that we did for the veterans. Clearly, we're concerned about veterans and making sure that their jobs are there when they come back. Making sure that we have good mental health. You have thousands of soldiers coming back that are killing themselves on an annualized basis. It is a significant problem in this country right now, and the VA has not been doing their job. We've created opportunities for economic benefits and grant programs for these veterans to be able to open up businesses in the state of Texas. We want them to, it's always amazing is that, they go and they come back and fight and they have serious issues and we don't deal with them. We all stand up and let them get on the plane first and applaud and everything else, but they come home and some of them become lost as a result. And so we did a lot of work. I don't know if you want to talk about it anymore.
No, the only thing I'll add to that is we put a significant amount of funding in this budget for the next 2 years for mental health across the board. And, across party lines, we really worked hard to make sure that we have funding channeled in those directions, and we have a way to monitor the success of the way that money is used, and we're excited about it, and our veterans are going to benefit from it. So.
One of the other bills that we passed for veterans is that we made sure that the wounded individuals, wounded soldiers in Fort Hood massacre in 2009 are awarded the Purple Heart. That was one of those deals is that, typically Purple Hearts are awarded. Purple Hearts are awarded to people when they are injured overseas or military combat, but we made sure that got taken care of as well. Some pro-life issues, and we look at it, it's interesting, both Brandon and I are very conservative Republicans, we live in conservative areas. I'm not sure how much more that can be done on pro-life issues in the state of Texas. I think we've done everything. There was one bill that didn't get done, and I've listened to some of the pro-life groups. Some have said we've done a good job, some have criticized us and said we didn't do anything. Well, three things that we did. Number one, we made sure that we improved the provisions for judicial bypass, and what that means is that right now, if a minor under the age of 18 decides that they want to terminate their pregnancy, is that they have to be notifications in the judicial bypass process. has been dealt with for a long time that's out there, meaning the parents have a right to know because there's a minor that's involved in that process. We also finally dealt with since 1999, this law has been in effect. House Bill 3074, Drew Springer passed this bill. We worked very hard this session with all the different groups. There was one group that just would not agree on how to resolve this, and we finally got everybody on board on this. But this is the end-of-life care. Currently, right now, is that a doctor, without the permission of a family, can withhold food and water from a patient. The current time limit is 10 days. We've expanded that. The time limit hasn't expanded, but the food and water provision has expanded. That took a long time to get done, but that's important because, at some point, your husband, your children, your grandparents, your parents, whatever, may go through that situation. And I can tell you on a personal level, my mother-in-law, very bad cancer, she passed away about 10 years ago, but that's how the process worked, and we didn't know it. We didn't know that we didn't have a say in the matter, and so they withheld food and water because there was nothing else that they could do. But, it's a horrible, horrible way to die, and so, the Catholic Conference got involved, and everybody got involved and said that, this is not the way to go. You're going to either go or you're not going to go. And so, and insurance companies and hospitals were, finally got on board with what we were trying to accomplish. And then the other one was increasing the resources and information on Down syndrome, because when people have abnormalities, they were just saying, well, there's something wrong with your child, and they don't give them the information on really what the impact associated with that is. I don't know if you want to address anything else on that. No? Okay. I'll talk about budget transparency.
So we've worked over the past 2 sessions, over the past 4 years, to end what we call diversions. So when we put money into the Department of Public Safety, that's a good thing. But when that money is used for building roads or maintaining roads, that's not necessarily what you as the taxpayer thought that money was going to go towards. And so we made sure through this budgeting process, as we did in the last, that we continue that culture of crafting a budget where when we say it's dedicated for a certain purpose, and that's what we come home and explain to you, that is the purpose that it will ultimately be spent on. And we probably had, a couple of decades worth of, some people call it budget gimmickry. They're all really valid purposes for what the budget is used for and the money is used for, but we're getting more and more transparent, and I know Dan and I both, from different sides of the building, continue to work towards those successes, and we achieved them.
One of the things, I'm going to read this to you, House Bill 7 does, and this could impact a lot of people in this room. House Bill 7 ends the professionals tax, which is a $200 annual fee on accountants, architects, attorneys, chiropractors, dentists, engineers, interior designers, investment advisors, landscape architects, land surveyors, optometrists, physician, property tax consultants, psychologists, real estate brokers, and veterinarians. It's over 600,000 professionals in the state of Texas. So Robert Sitton won't have to pay a $200 fee for his license anymore in the state of Texas. So I'm expecting you're going to take me out to dinner or something for that. So, but I think that's important. Raise his chamber dues by $200, yeah. I'm ready to check. But I think this is really important because for years, the state has balanced the budget based on putting these monies that are supposed to be used for one purpose. You voted for these, in most cases, you voted for these. These were constitutional amendments. We asked you, how would you like to use your tax dollars? And then they start using the money in different ways. And so, my position is that you either are going to use the money for its intended purposes or give it back. And so they gave it back, and that's going to result in about $150 million a year going back to taxpayers, professional organizations. So that is very significant along the way. So I think to wrap up, we looked at making sure we provided tax relief that's out there, transportation funding, increased our border security. We provided y'all to put a gun on your hip if that's what you want to do. Improved education, albeit I know there's some criticism out there we didn't go far enough. And like I said, we've got some work to do on that. You always have work to do on education. Made sure we protected our veterans and protected life. And we use fiscal constraint, I would think.
So we definitely have a few minutes for questions. We wanted to save time for questions. So if y'all are ready, Dan, you're ready?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
We'll get you a microphone.
I have a question and a comment. First, a comment to say thank you for some of those 4,900 bills that didn't get passed. In particular, I got 15 or 20 of them I was working on. Thank you so much for those last minute amendments and all that stuff, the non-transparency issues. Thank you. And then my last is a question about the open carry. As a city, when we have a convention center, and we have people come in, will we have the right or should, I'm not sure how to handle, can we ask people if they have their CHL?
Well,
Because some people are going to bluff.
well,
We don't have gun shows, and that's a good thing, but we have other events that are a little tricky.
yeah, and so law enforcement definitely can. And do you man those events with law enforcement personnel, or?
Only if we have alcoholic beverages being served, so sometimes we will not. Let's just take our Houston Gym and Mineral Show. We'll have a lot of exhibitors. We won't have alcohol, but we have thousands of kids coming over.
Right.
I'm not saying that we'll have an influx of open carry all of a sudden. I don't know. It's just a question that came up that we were discussing.
Yeah, I think you'll be able to ask. I don't think you'll be able to set any parameters on any restrictions as far as removal, but I think you certainly would be able to ask, and then we'll get some information to you for what kind of signage you can and can't have, and some of the do's and don'ts. But that's all I know at this point. Yeah. Anybody else? Any questions at all that are important to you? Make sure you've got a couple of politicos up here that you hit us with them, right? Yes, Robert.
With the the money that was put into transportation, and we've talked to several of the county commissioners about getting in line for road projects and all that stuff. What is that process? Where are we at with that? Releasing those funds, and because that's a big hot button around here is infrastructure, moving bodies from point A to point B.
Right, we can both chime in on this, but TxDOT, for the projects that they oversee, just like we had the proposition on the ballot, a couple of Novembers ago to decide how much transportation money we all as Texans were going to approve be spent in an extra amount. That's all scheduled and calendared. And so you have a regional engineer for TxDOT that's over this area, and he can tell you exactly, and we can help you obtain that calendar. He can tell you, or she can tell you exactly how those projects, are lined up with the money that we're putting in this budget right now. The motor vehicle sales tax money is going to provide between $1.5 and $2.5 billion in additional money to TxDOT itself, and we'll have to see, based on the priorities across the state, how we've been able to fight for an allocation that comes to our area. And we're usually faring pretty well because we have such high density growth and concerns for infrastructure.
I think the way it works here in Harris County, certainly in the geographic Harris-Galveston area, is that HGAC is the Houston-Galveston Area Council. Is the group that actually highlights and puts the priorities in place with Judge Emmett, certainly in Harris County, allocated a certain amount of funds that are out there. I'm going to give you a great example though. 1960. Those of us remember when, this is back in 2004, 2005, when they talked about expanding 1960, and there were some resources that were put in place to try and be able to do that. And what we found is that the big problem that we have is that when they developed 1960, they didn't put the easements in properly. And so you had to go negotiate with each of those landowners along the way to be able to deal with that. And of course, the attorneys were all there that represent the landowners versus the state, and as you go forward. So, but that is a project that we're pushing for. If there's something in particular that you see that is related to a state versus a county, we work very closely because we have two precincts, and at least in my district, two precincts. Precinct 2, Jack Mormon. Precinct 4, Jack Cagle. And then I believe Judge Emmett sits on the board of HGAC, so Ron's here and he can go into that as well. But it's a combined effort, and we're allocated a certain amount of those resources on an annualized basis to be able to deal with that. And so we're looking at continuing to find areas to make improvements along the way. But certainly if you look at the improvements Westlake Houston 1960. That was funded through a combination of county and state funds. And so we coordinate along the way. The one thing that we have been really not able to tap into out in this area, which I've been working with the city and Dave Martin, the mayor, and then Metro, is that Metro funds, Metro dollars that are coming into and being paid into our district. Because you have the Kingwood Park and Ride, you have the Humboldt Park and Ride that's out there. And so you look at, how do those people, get to where they're going on these buses. And so there's additional funding that we need to be able to get for that.
Sam, we have a question from a professional that has $200 more in his pocket.
He's going to pass the plate here in a minute. I caught the tail end of the lieutenant governor on the local radio station the other day, and I didn't hear all what he was saying, but something to the effect, even though your appraisal rate or your appraised value may go up, that you may not be taxed on it unless the entity votes to, or something to that effect. Is that?
I don't know, that's Brandon's boss, I'll let him explain that, hold on.
So one of the bills that I carried this session is Senate Bill 1760, and it was one of the 5 bills that ended up being final negotiated sort of settlement between the House and the Senate to avoid a special session. And that bill is the bill that Lieutenant Governor Patrick was talking about on the radio, where if in July all the appraisal districts will certify the tax rolls for exactly what all the values are for commercial and residential. And once those values are set, there is a threshold of up to 8%, I believe, where local government, has to decide whether or not they're going to raise the effective tax rate. And we put an amendment on that bill. Paul Betancourt amended my bill to require a 60% or supermajority voting threshold for local governments to raise the effective tax rate. Prior to that, it was a simple majority. Sometimes it won't make that big of a difference. Other times, if something's down to 1 vote and it's that tenuous of an issue, it can make a huge difference. And I think that's what he was referring to. We don't have an appraisal cap. I carried that bill with Robert Nichols as well, and there's just not the political will in the legislature among most of the other counties to implement a lower appraisal cap. We have one now, it's 10%. But the reference on what Lieutenant Governor Patrick was talking about was related to that supermajority requirement now for local governments to raise your tax rate.
And I know we're almost done, but I want to add 2 quick points to that on the appraisal caps, and then another bill that I carried that didn't pass the House because it got popped on a point of order. When I mean pop means it got killed on a point of order. House rules are much different than the Senate. Do you guys actually have rules? Okay, you suspend them all the time, that's right. Suspend the Constitution, pass it. But the Senate ended up passing my bill on the very last night, and we couldn't get it done. But it was good, though, because 2 things, though. Appraisal caps, the biggest enemy that I have found that is out there that fights against stuff that we try to do in Austin is the Texas Municipal League. Now, I know, Daryl, you guys are part of that, and they do a lot of good work for you guys, but they misrepresent a lot of things that are out there, and it's unfortunate. One of the bills that I did have that I'm going to take another shot at next time was an anti-annexation bill that I think was very important, specifically for it doesn't help Kingwood, but it would. But it does prevent them from taking other areas like Atascocita. The city of Houston came in under Bill White's administration and took most of the MUDs and the dollars that were associated with that. And that hurts the volunteer fire department in the Atascocita area, Westlake Houston Parkway area. So Nancy and I live in Walden. We're serviced by Atascocita Volunteer Fire Department. So we're paying more for our services as a result of what happened. And so we'll take another shot at that next year. But Texas Municipal League worked very, very, very hard against me, including the city of Houston and a lot of the other cities. I know Daryl didn't work against me because he doesn't want to annex Atascocita anyways, right, Mayor? You guys don't want us, right? I think the mayor's saying no. But at the end of the day, it's important because we want to make sure we're protecting the people, and the bill was really simple. All I said was that if you want to be annexed, the people in that area have a right to vote. And Texas Municipal League said, no, they don't. So that's the kind of stuff that we get to deal with on a day in and day out basis.
One more question.
Okay?
Thanks for your work on the pro-life issues. And on the homestead exemption increase, is there anything we need to do, or does it just happen automatically? And when does it take effect?
Happens automatically, and it will be for the next tax year, I believe, is what it's going to go into effect. So it's effective, unless you know, right? So 2016, it'll be on your statement 2016. Yeah. And so for those people that are actually over 65 and their taxes are frozen, you'll see a permanent long-term reduction in your tax bill. So I think that's a good thing.
One thing we'd like to ask, were either of you followed here today?
Probably. Charlie's bringing up an interesting point. We had, I've never seen this happen before. This is my 12th year, going to my 12th year in politics. We had, I don't know, TMZ would probably be the best way to, TMZ type reporters following us. And it was very interesting, to say the least. There was rumors out there of, that they were putting devices on people's cars and things of that nature. Who knows? But the movie will be coming out soon, and so you'll get to see it. I had a little altercation with them, and let's just say that I pulled an Humble, Texas on them, and we agreed to disagree. But we had a great session. It's unfortunate that kind of stuff is out there, and politics is a nasty business. You got to have a thick skin. You got to be able to deal with it. At the end of the day, I believe, people have to remember, we're citizen legislators. We get $600 a month. We got to keep our businesses going, our families going. We're away for 5 months. We get to come back and then live our lives again. I was proud of the work that we did this session. I know Brandon was, and just honored to serve you.
I just want to say the same. It's a privilege to represent you in the Senate. We certainly worked hard this session. We hope that you're pleased with the results. And we'll be back to give some more updates and to be with you again. So thank you so much.